nation. But how much do you know about this valuable yet finite resource? On our radio program, Guyana's Oil and You, we strike at the heart of every issue with informed views and credible data. The time is now for you to arm yourself with insightful knowledge on your oil wealth. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Guyana's Oil and You. I'm your hostess, senior journalist at Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg, and tonight's discussion centers on the importance of having the right regulatory protections for the oil and gas sector and the actions some groups are willing to take to ensure this is done. To help us explore this topic this evening, we have the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Dr. Vincent Adams. Sir, welcome. Dr. Adams, you can hear me? Dr. Adams?
You hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, good.
Great.
Yeah, that's
So yes,
technology for you.
welcome and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Anytime, it's always my pleasure, Kiana. And I want to say good night and a happy season, Merry Christmas and season's greetings to all of our Guyanese folks, and hope you have a nice New Year's.
Thank you, sir. And joining Dr. Adams is Dr. Andrew Brandley, professor at the University of Munich. Sir, welcome and thank you for taking the time to be here. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks a lot, Kiana, for inviting me to participate this evening. I'm representing the small Guyanese diaspora in Germany and Switzerland. And I'm currently at my home in Zurich. As you can see in the background, we don't have really snow here. It's 10 degrees Celsius, so we don't have the cold spill that Vince will soon probably experience in Tennessee. So we are still safe, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. And probably Vince will be the lead in this discussion, because a lot of the questions that you're going to be touching is where Vince has really very deep knowledge, being the former head of EPA in Guyana.
Thank you very much, sir. So we will also be joined, hopefully later on in the program or as soon as possible, with the presence of Darsh Kusial, a financial researcher and IT expert. So we hope to have him join the conversation as soon as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to jump into the first question, which I'll pose to Dr. Adams. Sir, Guyana is now in its third year as an oil-producing state. What is your assessment of our performance for 2022? How do you think the government has performed in terms of environmental and fiscal management of the industry?
I wish I could report and the good news, and it's not. And this is about following the laws. It's not about what's in the laws already. And I can give you tons of examples. What has been happening here is that Exxon has been allowed to get away with thumbing their noses at our laws. And an excellent example to start with is the full liability coverage, which means having protection for if something happens. If there's an oil spill, as we know, we knew what happened when we had the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Besides the damage to the environment, it ended up costing over 145 billion US dollars. When I was there, the EPA demanded and received and agreed upon, by the way, and agreed upon, which meant that that Exxon agreed that they will have insurance plus anything over and above the insurance will be covered by the parent company, which is Exxon. That's in writing. The vice president himself has confirmed that it exists. When he was on Glenn Lyle's show, he read it. He read the clause in the permits that said exactly that there is full coverage in full liability coverage for all the permits that have been issued, which means that it's the four projects. So he has confirmed that. When he confirmed it, and it's in there in writing, they've signed it in a permit. It's a legal document, and the government has been allowing them to get away with not complying with the laws of the country. So that's one thing. The other thing is, they are even, like production, for example, the EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment, which is the Bible of safety. That's where you define all the safety envelopes. It said specifically for LISA 1, thou shalt not exceed, though it says the safe operating limit is 120,000 barrels per day of oil. They're now operating at 150,000 barrels, which means it's about 25% increase through nothing else could be described as greed, when they themselves said, not only did they say they're not going to come close to that safe operating limit, it's also written in the EIA that their operating limit will be 100,000 barrels per day, so that they wouldn't even come close to it. And then they come up with these fancy language about bottlenecking and all that kind of stuff to confuse people. The point is, they're violating these laws and the safety limit, which means they're putting this country at risk. They're increasing the possibility of a spill, but yet they do not want to cover, they do not want to just sign a document that doesn't cost them anything, that they've signed up to, by the way. They're refusing to sign that document that says, we've got $600 million in insurance, which is a drop in the ocean. Who's gonna cover it afterwards? It will bankrupt the entire Caribbean, because it would wash away. If we get a spill as like we had in the Gulf, it would wash away all the islands, their entire tourist industry, fishing, everything. And so tell me why Exxon would not want to sign that. Is that an indication that somehow they do not intend to cover it and they're just going to walk away and leave us? What is there? Why don't they want to sign a document that doesn't cost them anything unless something happens? It's telling me that they're going to take the risk. And if something happens, they're going to walk away. That's the reason. That's the only conclusion that I can come to as to why they're not going to be able, they don't want to sign that document. And the government of Guyana will be the first one to be bankrupted, because, our entire national budget is like $3 billion. So if we were only $3 billion or so, how are we going to cover $145 billion? Where is that money going to be coming from? So that's the dilemma we're in. And it's very, very disturbing that this government is neglecting its responsibility to ensure that the rule of law is complied with. I see them locking up MPs and vendors and everybody else because they claim they're not following the rule of law. Why aren't they locking up Mr. Rutledge and Exxon for not following the rule of law with much, much higher consequences to the nation? So the report is not too good. Besides, there are other examples. They're dumping produced water that is highly contaminated with oil and radioactivity and all kinds of toxic metals into the ocean. When, as a matter of fact, when I was there, the EPA, and not only the EPA, the GGMC, the Department of Energy, directed them that there shall be no dumping of water in the ocean. You will re-inject it in accordance with the World Bank standards and with accordance with international standards. As soon as the new government took over, they scrapped that. They're allowing them to dump water. And then in the air, of course, they flare. They're hiding data on the flaring. The one piece of information they brag about, well, they've got a website. If you go on the website, They're covering all the oil that they're producing and everything else. And the one data that they're not covering is telling the Guyanese people how much they're flaring. Why are they hiding this information? But the bottom line is Exxon is being given special treatment to violate the laws, and they're getting away with it. So that's the report. It's not too good. I know Exxon position is, which is and the government is, we're making a whole lot of money. All of that money will not mean anything if we've got to take all of that money and spend it on a spill. So that would be my assessment as to where things are right now.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Dr. Brandley, what is your take of Guyana's performance in 2022? Do you think the government has performed well?
Well, it's a mixed bag from my point of view. I think there is some movement with regard to the PSA, as we can see that the government, for the new oil blocks that went up for auction just recently, they are proposing a new PSA. I should maybe spell this out for the general public, a production sharing agreement. However, this is very hypothetical at this point. First of all, they put in some some important points that they would like to have, but this PSA has to date not really been finalized. I've just read recently that there's going to be some kind of a consultation process, but this would be very limited at the end. I think it's going to be similar like for the National Resource Fund Act that came out pretty much a year ago. People were informed about it a few days before it went into Parliament. No chance to really discuss it in detail, and we see now the results. And that's where I would like really to point out to the Guyanese public that you have no savings in your sovereign wealth fund. This is the fact. We had, by the end of last year, there were $630 million in there. That money has essentially been drained completely by the present government in line with the new NRF Act. So $600 million went into the consolidated fund and is being spent at the government's discretion. Now, if you look at the NRF Act passed in, as I said, a year ago, that money should be actually only used for earmarked project of national interest. I personally have not seen no list what these projects are. I see at the same time that the government is using this money to pay out, to give handouts left and right to special interest groups. I mean, I don't want to be jealous about fishermen getting handouts, but I think it's not a sustainable strategy, or giving it to rice farmers, etc. The idea of a sovereign wealth fund is that we use part of that money for current projects, but we put the bulk of the money aside. It will grow over the years exponentially. But if you drain it completely each year, there will be nothing there. Look at the situation in Trinidad. The sovereign wealth fund has, as far as I remember, the last time I looked, it was $6 billion US, which is essentially extremely small. And that one is running since 20 years. The other good example is Norway. And we always being told by the government that, oh, we can't compare with Norway because Norway was already a rich country when they introduced the sovereign wealth fund. This is not really true. Norway was one of the poorest countries before they found oil in Europe. But they were very stringent in saving money. And they have now the biggest sovereign wealth fund. It's well managed, and they are just withdrawing the money that the interest that they gain on the money in the sovereign wealth fund. So I'm really afraid with regard to the situation in Guyana that the oil savings or the revenue or the profit you make from oil is being spent right away. And we see it, the national budget has increased from 3 billion, if I have the numbers correctly, to 1.6 billion last year to this year to 3 billion. And that's fed by taking essentially all the money out of the sovereign wealth fund, the NRF, and using it to spend it on projects. At the same time, there was a World Bank report that of the 8 billion foreign investment that went to the Caribbean, 4 billion went to Guyana. So there's tons of money coming into Guyana without the government really needing to use up all that oil money that we get. And besides that, it's very little because most of the oil revenues, 75%, are used to pay for ongoing investments. So maybe we can get back then also the whole taxation issue. I think the whole strategy with the proposed PSAs don't make much sense to me, especially the issue of taxation. And maybe to finish this, I don't want to have a monologue here. I would just want to make it once again clear to the Guyanese public that the government of Guyana is paying the taxes for Exxon, and there is no sunset clause. So for as long as the production sharing agreement is not changed, Guyana is going to be paying more taxes in the name of Exxon than it actually makes with the profit oil, its share of profit oil. And this is, in my opinion, not sustainable, and it's not fair towards the Guyanese people. And at least the taxation should be at the recommendation of the OECD, which is 15% for corporate taxes for companies that have revenues or turnover of more than 750 million, and that's where, of course, Exxon and its partners are well placed. So I think on the positive side, maybe to close this section here, the government is thinking about new production sharing agreements. That's good. It's, as far as I understand, also talking to experts outside of Guyana to get some advice. On the other hand, I don't see a strategy there to bring the production sharing agreements that they have in mind in a logical context of the world landscape of taxation, and also putting it in a position that it would make then sense to also alter the Stabroek production sharing agreement along the lines what you're starting to propose. And I think if you have a smart strategy, you have to move in this type of a direction. And maybe as last point, the taxation issue, I think, is the best issue that you can, best argument that you can make, because it will be very difficult to defend for the biggest industry in the country, the biggest contributor to the GDP of Guyana, that they are tax exempt indefinitely, at least as long as the current production sharing agreement is valid. While the common citizen pays income taxes, pays value-added taxes, etc., while these huge companies plus their employees, their subcontractors are all exempt from taxation. So I think there has to be a change on this level, and I see at least some thinking, but it's too little, too slow. That's maybe my assessment at this point as an observer from Zurich, Switzerland.
Thank you, Dr. Brandley. Dr. Adams, I would love to get your response to some of the commentary made by Dr. Brandley, specifically as it pertains to the production sharing agreement, the new PSA that government is working on. Do you get the sense that investors will be comfortable with there being two standards, one for the Stabroek block and another set for anyone else who comes in? Do you think that will create any type of uneasiness? Do you think it's in our best interest to have a double standard, so to speak, within the oil and gas industry? Or do you think that it's going to work? What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, my take is just outright, it's a distraction. I can't speak for the investors because every investor are going to be different, but trust me, I've heard from some people who are interested, and it's obvious that any reasonable person would declare it unfair to start with. Remember now, this was the same government, this was the same vice president and president who, when they were in opposition, said that this was the worst contract. When they get into office, they will negotiate. As a matter of fact, the vice president used the word that says that this here is a selling out of our people's patrimony. When they get in there, they will renegotiate the contract. So they're in there right now. So this here is a distraction from the Stabroek Block. And we've already discovered 11 billion barrels of oil in the Stabroek Block. I would like for anybody to tell me what else remains. What else remains? Because normally when you go into these basins and you start drilling wells, you're starting to see where the low hanging fruits are, and I guarantee you Exxon knows where those are. What would be interesting, Kian, is to see how many of these new blocks Exxon would be bidding on. That would be a good yardstick. But the point is, to get back to your question, this here is grossly unfair, and it's a distraction with this new PSA to distract everybody from the Stabroek Block, which they're committed to get into. I know you're bringing up whatever is left. I don't know how much is left into the basin. You already discovered 11 billion barrels. How much is left? So this here is just a smoke screen to once again to follow their modus operandi, to give Exxon exactly what it wants. This here is all driven by Exxon. I mean, let's face it. Exxon never, from day one, Exxon never wanted any competition. And they went in, they got the hog of where the oil is, which is the Stabroek Block. And so it's going to be very interesting because remember now we're even moving from the deep waters to the shallow waters. You know, I don't know what's there, but I guarantee you that Exxon knows what's there because when they did all their seismic surveys and they based on their drilling logs and everything, they know where that oil is. And I can't predict. I'm hoping that there's much more left. So this here is just a smoke screen and a distraction from getting back. They need to treat everybody fairly. And it's, as a matter of fact, this here is unfair because, you know, many of the investors, because some of, people are interested. I don't know if they're going to be investing or not. But some of these folks are local people. They're local people who want to get into the action to invest. But now, you're going to give them the much more challenge to make it even more challenging to them economically for them to invest, the local people. So the local folks seems as if this whole oil development stuff, the local people are always holding the short end of the stick, whereas Exxon is carrying away the hog of everything. So that's where I stand in it. It's, to me, it's just a smoke screen and a distraction to get away from the pressure they're getting for negotiating, renegotiating the Stabroek Block. And it's definitely nobody, I want to see anybody who's going to come, who would use the argument. Maybe you've heard of people who are going to use the argument that it is not unfair to the new investors. I want to hear what would be those people's argument.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. I want to shift focus to the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, we have several permits that have been issued by this regulator, and there are a number of provisions which speak to studies that have to be done. There are provisions that also speak to how chemicals, hazardous waste is supposed to be treated by ExxonMobil and its partners. Do you think that the EPA ought to be more forthcoming with the steps it's taking to ensure Exxon and its partners are complying with the provisions in these permits?
Oh, absolutely, Kiana. That was one of the things when I was there at the EPA. We had set up an entire program. I hear the president, the vice president, from time to time brags about the cradle to grave. As if,
Right.
well, he said, well, for the first time, well, guess where that concept came from? I mean, I've talked about Cradle to Grave on your show, so not that I'm bragging, but I was the one who introduced Cradle to Grave to Guyana, even to Exxon, which was kind of surprising that I had to do that. I directed them as to a process is to document. As a matter of fact, the document in terms of the steps that you have to follow. And here, just in very simple terms, you know what was happening before? What was the process we had in Exxon was generating these zillions of tons of waste that is coming off of the ship. They came to this treatment facility. That they didn't have what is something called waste acceptance criteria. Any treatment facility, it has a treatment facility, the technology is designed based on the waste that comes in, the type of waste, the concentration, the contaminants. So technology is very depending on the waste. Like for example, you may have a certain waste for mercury, you may have a different thing for lead, a different type of technology. They didn't have any of that. When I asked them, where is your waste acceptance criteria to show the technology is going to take care of the waste, and you have to sample the waste before it comes, there was anything of the sort. And even in the burial, because when you finish treating it, whether it's by incineration or chemical treatment, you're still left with waste residue. Well, that residue has to go to the landfill. I asked the landfill for the same thing. Where is that waste acceptance plan in terms of your design of your facility? Could you accept that waste? Well, I don't know if I probably said it on your show, that when I was there, we disallowed them. We disallowed the other cell. I think it was the second or third cell to accept that waste because they did not have a proper design of a landfill with liners and everything else, so that whatever goes in there will not seep through into the groundwater. So when I was there, we even put, I had, before I left, I had like 16 processes for every single piece of work that we are doing in terms of steps of how do we treat waste. The whole process from the time the waste is generated to the time it's finally buried into the landfill through treatment and everything else. There are no processes. Before I arrived there, we had, when I left, we had about 16 documents in draft. I do not know what the status is of those drafts, but you're absolutely correct. There has to be processes, but based on everything that has been happening, like almost the technical staff at the EPA, the experienced staff, they're all gone. I was doing some counting myself. The senior technical staff, they were like, out of the 15 top senior people, I counted like 12 of them have been let go or they left. So there are a lot of young people that are coming in, training. You remember we had set up a whole training program where EPA was going to sponsor employees to go get special training abroad,
Right.
Go visit sites. All of that has been cut out. They were told that they're on their own. So there's no technical capacity and no attempt. You remember the $1 million program that we got from the World Bank to set up a specifically targeted program to the oil and gas industry, an oil and gas expertise, a group of 36 member team with special training, including 24/7 coverage on the FPSOs. All of that has been abandoned. So there's nothing happening in terms of developing the capacity. We're handing out permits. We're even saying EIAs are not allowed. You see what happened with this case with the radioactive storage of those tools on these banks. So everything is just, nobody is paying attention to the environment as far as I'm concerned. And we see, we see what has happened with in the permits that are currently being written. So to me, that's my biggest concern. There's no care or respect for the environmental process, which are critical. And we're seeing it unfolding. And if you think it's bad now, Kiana, we're now starting this whole operation. We're now starting. And if you do not put the processes in place at the start, you cannot reverse when something happens, it's almost impossible to reverse. If you have an accident or you have groundwater contamination, you cannot reverse it anymore. So those are my concern. I don't think that the EPA is doing its job, well, by a far way, by the way. And so that's a major concern. It is a major concern.
Thank you very much for your perspectives there, Dr. Adams. We've just been joined by Mr. Darsh Kusiel, financial researcher and IT expert. Sir, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Guyana.
All right. So we would have covered several topics thus far. Dr. Adams and Dr. Brandley, they would have provided their assessment of Guyana's performance, marking its third year anniversary as an oil-producing state. And the assessment thus far is that we have a mixed bag. The government has not done enough to ensure the guardrails for environmental and fiscal management are in place. And I'd love to get your take as well on what is your view on how the country has done in its third year as an oil producing state. Do you think there's room for improvement, or we've covered a lot of bases already?
Okay, so I think I'll first start just touching a little bit on the financial stuff, and then covering some of the touching back on some of the things with regard to the environment.
Sure.
So I guess for me, I would just look at it in a simple manner. We started pumping oil in December 2019. We started about 100,000 barrels or so, get up to 120,000. Now we're about, that's Lisa 1. And right now we're up to, on Lisa 1, they're pumping about 150,000 barrels a day. And then on Lisa 2, they're pumping 200,000 barrels a day, 230,000 barrels a day. That's a lot of oil coming up, a lot of money. Okay, so I would look at it this way: is there was a stat from a few international organizations that said sometime around 2018 there were 41% of Guyanese living on $5.50 a day. Now we come to this point where a few days away from Christmas, and there was an update maybe a few weeks back, and that said now there's like 46% of Guyanese living on $5.50 a day, and that's not even taking into account the inflation. So that $5.50 US around 2018, they can buy much less stuff because of inflation than you can buy it today. So to me, and just looking at that simple measure, look at how has Guyanese benefited from the financial aspects. To me, there's not much benefit for the entire population if I look at that stat, right? You see this, you hear about all this GDP numbers, etc., but that's all meaningless to the person on the street, right? So that's on the financial side. Coming back to the environmental thing, I think one thing we at OGGN, which is Oil and Gas Governance Network, www.oggn.org, one thing we're very concerned about, which Dr. Adams has raised many times, is the potential for an oil spill. So the BP, the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, that, as Dr. Adams mentioned, it was 145 billion US dollars. Okay, to date, we have only earned, I think up to August, we've only earned 1.2 billion from the oil. So if we have a massive oil spill, there is no way we'll be able to come anywhere close to 145 billion. So I think that is, to me, that's the most important thing. What does it matter if we're getting, the trickle of the money we're getting, if we have an oil spill and we end up being bankrupt? Okay, so on that topic, what we have done is we've worked with the organization Guyana, Red Thread, and we've recently launched a petition, and in that petition, we're demanding that Exxon honors its commitment. So as Dr. Adams had talked about, right, in the LISA 2 EPA permit, LISA 1 EPA permit, etc., there is, a commitment for full liability coverage where the parent company, Exxon, Hess, and CNOC, will cover anything that the shell companies cannot cover, right? So we launched this petition this weekend, and we're hoping to get people signing up, etc., sharing the petition. You can find the petition at oggn.org, or if you go to change.org, you just search for Exxon Space Guyana, and you can find that petition. So to me, 3 years on, that is the most important issue: is we need this insurance coverage.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Brandley, you wanted to add a comment?
Yes, I wanted just
Please
to
go ahead.
add, we should keep in mind that if there's an oil spill, the current oil production sites, LISA 1 and LISA 2, are in deep water. So that's very difficult to plug and to clean up. We're talking about oil production that happens 1 kilometer below sea level. So you can't go down with divers. You need submarines and stuff like that to fix it if something happens. Of course, the chances of this happening is relatively low. We haven't had now for a long time no bigger oil spills like the Deepwater Horizon, which was 12 years ago. But one of these oil spills is sufficient to cause huge havoc. Now in the US, the whole liability issue was not very clear for BP, which was the company behind the Deepwater Horizon. They were not directly operating it, but they were the ones who were essentially giving the contract to a second party operator. They were dragging their feet, and it was President Obama who put the gun on their chest very literally and told them, you better get your act together, and I'm not waiting to go through the courts. Now, Guyana won't have that same type of gun. It's probably a water pistol, and they're going to laugh at you if you try doing this. The US is the largest financial sector on the planet. They could, in the worst case, make it really bad for you to be listed at the stock exchanges in the US if you, they don't even have to tell this openly, but companies like BP don't want to be in the bad books with the US because the consequences can be very, very severe. Guyana, with 800,000 people, they're going to laugh at you, or they will just ignore you and they will say, so what are you going to do? So I think the issue of having insurance that, as we've demand in the petition, is something useful, sensible, and I think all Guyanese who care about having enough liability insurance to cover the event of a unlikely oil spill, but once it's there, it's no longer unlikely, then you have to deal with it. And as I pointed out, it's in deep water, and it's definitely will be a lot more expensive than an oil spill on land or in shallow waters. So
yes,
I think it's a rational argument to sign this petition. Maybe to add to the EPA and maybe 2 points here. It seems that the EPA has a strategy of basically just waving things through. The courts have to be called in to call them back, and Vince Adams mentioned the recent court decision, I think it was earlier this week or end of last week, that a site to store radioactive, I think it's low radioactivity, but nevertheless it's radioactivity and you have to follow the laws of the country, needs an environmental impact study. And this needs to be done. And I think what organizations like OGGN are asking is that the law of the land is being followed. And And I think we're not asking for anything outrageous. We're just asking that the law of the land is being followed, and in this case, that an environmental impact study is being done as demanded. And the courts have supported this. Of course, it's cumbersome if non-government organizations with limited budgets always have to resort to the courts. So we would actually expect that the Environmental Protection Agency works in the interest of the Guyanese people and not in the interest of big corporate governments. So that's where I see it. Maybe one last point, I think, which Vince pointed out, training of people and having adequate staff. Now you can train people, but in the current labor market in Guyana, where trained people are basically sucked up as hot commodities, especially if they have any training in those areas that the EPA needs, those people will be in high demand also in the oil industry. So I think a lot of those people that Vince probably trained are now working for Exxon and or for some of the third-party suppliers and companies that are associated with the oil activities, with the whole oil industry, which points again to the problem, and this was again highlighted earlier this week in a report, which said that, I think it was, not sure it was the World Bank or Guyana, you might have the data, have the actual source in mind, but nevertheless, we have a shortage of labor in Guyana at the level of 200,000 skilled workers.
Right, that was the
cover.
International Labor Organization.
Yeah, the ILO in Geneva, actually.
Yes.
Thank you for reminding me. It was the ILO in Geneva. Exactly. So we have this whole issue about labor shortages, which the government is not addressing. And this is, of course, a direct consequence of the oil industry expanding in Guyana. So that's definitely also a point where I see that the government has not been doing their homework. Actually, as a matter of fact, the local content laws are completely detrimental to this, because if you ask for local companies to have a high percentage of Guyanese employees and these people are not around because they are sucked up by the oil industry, how can you have this law and at the same time these companies cannot find the staff to meet the requirement? Like 51% of the staff have to be Guyanese, of the low-level staff have to be Guyanese employees, and the top management has to be, I think, 75%. So I see here something that works not together. In a country like Guyana, with a small population, with a limited labor market, local content laws, the way they are formulated are for me more a distraction and actually makes companies leave the country because there is no way they can meet these requirements. Maybe they're going to be adjusted, I don't know, but I can see definitely there maybe to finish this off, this argument, it seems to me also, it's again like Vince pointed out, it's a distraction from the fact that the oil revenues are essentially not really trickling down to the people. So you promise them this law that you cannot really implement properly, because companies will have a hard time fulfilling the stringent requirements. And then you promise people that they're going to make lots of money by supplying services to the oil industry, which again are projections that are hard to meet and hard to prove at the end. So I think for the Guyanese population, getting tax revenues from the oil industry is a much better way of making sure that money remains in the country and renegotiating the production sharing agreement, that profit oil is shared in a more fair manner. In my personal opinion, it should be 2/3 should go to the Guyanese people and 1/3 to the operators, particularly because these fields have been de-risked, which is not the case, of course, for these new oil blocks that are coming up. And my personal view there is that we'll have to see whether anybody will really do the bidding, because the whole conditions are very stringent. The oil blocks are 1/10 of the Stabroek block. And as Vince pointed out, if Exxon is not bidding, you know that things don't look too great. I would like to close at
Yes,
this point.
let me quickly add to, because this here is important in terms of building capacity. It's a crucial element, and one of the things that we had in with the training program, that we call it the study leave policy, that was approved by the board and everything, and we are just waiting on our budget to submit our budget in 2020. COVID hit, so we were hoping 2021. Of course, I left and it was scrapped. But part of that training, Andrea, was, of course, to compete. One of the first things that I did when I arrived at EPA, in some cases, I doubled people's salaries to compete. So people started flooding, wanting. I mean, you wouldn't believe every day how many applications we were getting, because we were changing the way. There were no politicization. I cut all of that was gone. Politics had nothing to do. But anyway, as part of that policy, if the EPA was going to send you on training, you had to sign a contract to serve for at least 5 years, depending on how many years of training. So hopefully within that 5 years, we ran similar programs in the US, because we face the same thing about competition for labor in the US also. But you've got to compete, like forgiving student loans and all this type of stuff. It looks expensive up front, but it's worth it in the end, because you get loyal employees and you get employees who want to stay on as long as it's competitive. And the one thing that is always more competitive on the government side are benefits. It's not only the salary that matters, it's job security. I used to warn my staff all the time that they're not going to get the free ride that they get with government when they go into private industry, and they're going to learn really fast when they start going off to Exxon, because you're going to be you're going to have to work from overtime and everything else every single second of the day. It's not so. But those are the kinds of things that we were putting in place in order to compete with the private industry. Of course, that it doesn't matter anymore, because it was scrapped. And what was kind of funny, the EPA and the minister denied that the plan with the World Bank plan ever existed until it showed up on the front page. The cover of the document showed up on the front page of the newspapers, and then you start hearing all kinds of excuses. But anyway, so there was a plan. You're absolutely right. I mean, training is critical, but you've got to maintain. You've got to find a way to compete to maintain that stuff.
Dr. Adams, I'll just proffer one more question before we head into the conclusion of the program. And it's two-part. So do you get the impression that we are essentially walking through a minefield with the absence of financial assurance? And for the public, you can just briefly explain what that is and why it is important. And what impression do you get from the fact that a petition needs to be launched? Civil society groups need to launch an online petition asking for oil companies to respect and comply with the very provisions that are part of the permits that have been issued to them by a regulator. Do you get a sense that this is it is a shameful place, so to speak, for the fastest growing economy in the world to be in?
Absolutely. Kiana, it's to start with, it's a shameful, and you use the words, a shameful indictment of the government for some civic organization to have to be having a petition for a company to follow the rule of law. Okay, it's a disgrace. And especially when you're looking at how the Guyanese, the local business folks, I'm sure they're paying their taxes, they're doing everything that is correct. We see the vendors, we see that they're locking up the MPs because they're not following the law. All of that might be fine. But why are you allowing the foreign companies to come in and do as they please? And it's not only about them not following the law, it's the consequences of not following the law.
Right.
If we get a spill, and even to add to that, they're enhancing, Kiana, they're enhancing the probability that something will happen. When you go beyond the documents, the legal document says you cannot, for example, you cannot produce above a certain limit. And it's a reason why it says that that's the safety limit. Those were the exact language. It says the safe operating limit is 120,000 barrels per day. You're operating at 150,000 barrels, but then you starting with debottlenecking. If you want to go to 150,000, go through a process to prove that it's safe to operate. Go back through the process, but they don't want to do that. So to start with, they're putting this thing, they're increasing the risk of something happening. And then on top of that, on the backside, they're refusing to sign their own legal document that they agreed to say that they're going to have this parent company guaranteed to cover everything over and above what the insurance cannot cover. And the only reason you cannot tell me it's not costing them anything to sign that guarantee. And anybody with a little bit of common sense, a little bit of brain would understand, could only conclude that the reason behind it is that they have no intention, if things really get expensive, they're not gonna, they're gonna walk away. Like how Andre put it, in terms of Obama and this administration having a big bazooka, big gun, and we having a water pistol. And the eyes basically pass us and we are allowing them, the government is emboldening these folks to get away with these things. Remember, Kiana, on Glenn Lal's show, when Glenn asked the vice president, I almost fell out of my chair. Glenn said, how about full coverage assurance, liability coverage? The president took out his cell phone and read the clause that they were denying that said exactly that. He said, yes, we have full coverage in all of our permits. But yet, he didn't go the next step to say, well, okay, why isn't they fulfilling that full coverage with just a simple, no cost letter to say, you know what, we're going to commit to covering everything over and above this measly insurance. We have to stop talking about insurance because the insurance is minuscule. 600 million out of 145 billion is nothing. It doesn't matter what the insurance is. It's the other part, is the parent company guarantee that matters. And this full coverage liability that we talk about, or assurance, some people call it assurance, it comprises of insurance, and anything above the insurance, the parent company has agreed to cover it. That's a fact. It's there written in. That is the problem. So, and if something happens, it's not only us, Kiano, that is going to suffer, or the entire population. I mean, what are we going to leave our youths of Guyana? We talk about leaving money, the sovereign wealth fund is going to leave money for them. Half of our population, by 48%, is below the age of 26 or below. So when Exxon is going to be gone in 20 or 30 years, those, our bigger, they're going to be at their prime. Our largest sector of going to be at their prime. Is this what they're going to be inheriting? A bankrupt country? Not to mention the other countries in the Caribbean. Not to mention them, because they're so dependent on their beaches for tourism, and everything is going to be gone. The fishing industry is going to suffer. And so that is what this here is the most important thing, because if we get a spill, all of this billions that everybody are talking about, about 49 billion, that's the latest number I know, that we're going to end up with 49 billion. It's nothing compared to we're going to spend all of it, and it doesn't mean anything. We're back to square one. That should be the concern of every single Guyanese, and there should not have to be a petition by anybody for a company to follow the law. That's the problem we have, for a company to follow the rule of law. They cannot do that in the United States. Trust me. They would not even dream about, signing up to something in the law and not abiding with it. But again, their eyes just pass us, and the government is allowing them to take their eyes and pass the people of Guyana.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. I'll now turn to Mr. Kusial for your concluding remarks. Can you just remind us about the importance of this petition, where I can go to sign up, or anyone listening can go to sign up for this petition. And can you also give us your concluding thoughts on, Guyana's performance and how you think the society should enter the new year? What should be top of mind for Guyanese for 2023?
Okay. In terms of the petition, so as mentioned, before, folks can go to www.oggen.org. We have a link to the petition there. In the Facebook chat, in this Facebook chat here, we've also pinged a link to the petition, or you go directly to change.org and just search for Exxon and space Guyana. I do want to touch in terms of concluding on a few things. So Dr. Brandley mentioned, like, the Gulf of, the BP Gulf of Mexico oil spill. That was about 12 years ago. And I've seen, folks in blog comments, etc., mention, hey, Trinidad and Tobago, they've been, pumping oil for many decades and there's not been a major oil spill. But the pace we're pumping at and the exploration, the amount of exploration you're doing, it just increases the possibility of an oil spill, right? All these, like, you would read in the papers, every few months, oh, they're going to do 20, 30 new exploration or wells or whatever. That pace, you just increase the chance. And if it costs the oil companies nothing, why don't they sign it? And I also want to touch back on something Dr. Adams mentioned, right? So for Liza 1, the safety limit is 120,000 barrels. You can go to the Government of Guyana website and you can see they're pumping 150,000 barrels a day for Liza 1. For Liza 2, it's 220,000. You can go to a Government of Guyana website, and again, you see, they're pumping at least 230 to 240 thousand barrels per day. So that's just increasing, the risk. So these arguments that, hey, Trinidad and Tobago, has been pumping for decades, etc. That doesn't make sense to me when you're violating all these safety limits and at the rate of exploration and pumping you're doing. I think that just increases the chances of us having a massive oil spill that not only bankrupts Guyana, but causes severe problems. Because if you look at, if a spill occurs, you look at where that oil spill will flow, it would cause a lot of problems for the Caribbean countries that depend on tourism, right? So I think for 2023, the simple thing I would like to see, the government, honor the laws that we have, the laws of Guyana, and also fight for the people. They, as you mentioned at the start of the program, they have this new PSA for the blocks, for these new oil blocks. We're not sure if there's any oil there, but they had said they had consulted with IHS Markit, which is a very large, firm in this area in terms of doing an analysis of oil, etc. So if they consulted with IHS Markit, and IHS Markit says, okay, this is a fair and reasonable terms for the new PSA, right? Where, pay taxes, royalties 10%, etc. Why aren't those terms applied back to the Starbuck block, right? That would be in the interest of the Guyanese people, instead of, both the current government and the opposition they appear to be really on Team Exxon versus fighting for the Guyanese people. So that's what I would like to see for 2023, that the government and the opposition, with regard to the oil contracts, etc., the revenues, fight for the Guyanese people instead of giving away our oil wealth.
Thank you, Mr. Kusiel. Dr. Brandley, your concluding thoughts.
Well, I think a lot of points have been made already, particularly with regard to the environmental issues. Vince Adams has talked about them. Darsh Kusial has also mentioned them. The fact that we have to start a petition is also important, and I hope as a result of this interview today that more people will be aware of it. And maybe Kaieteur News could also run a story on it to alert people if that's in line with your editorial policies. I think we should also be positive to some extent about this. I think the fact that Guyana has oil off the coast, in the last 3 years, it has become from an unknown country to a country that people starting to recognize. It's been a recognized oil producer. It has within short time managed to bring this infrastructure into the country. We've talked about the deficiencies with regard to pumping too much oil without having beyond the certified levels. This has to be fixed, and it can be fixed if you have a responsible government that is doing its job. So I think that's what has to be done. On the other hand, we have also money coming into the country. We've talked already about the issue of the PSA that is not optimal, but there's a lot of additional investment coming into the country. And my hope is that it will have an impact also on the people in Guyana, that job opportunities will get better, and that this will improve living in Guyana. Of course, we also see the negative impact that real estate is getting expensive because you have, of course, an expat population. You have also people buying land, and I'm not sure how transparent that all works out. For example, Silica City, I'm not sure whether all those plots of land are already given away and people can make easy money by being first basically there to get that land. I don't know, it might be something that Kaieteur News might want to explore. How is the whole situation there? Is the area where Silica City is planned and the president has announced where it should be, how are the land rights there? Is this all government land, or is this land already all sold away to people that are somehow linked to the government? I don't have an idea, but this is definitely something that needs to be investigated and made clear. I personally would really look forward that in a small country like Guyana, that the two main parties shouldn't always be fighting against each other, but they should work together for the interest of the Guyanese people. And one prime example is working out strategies how to adjust and to the current Stabroek PSA, because it's in the interest of everybody that Exxon and its partners are taxed after a reasonable time of a tax holiday. You can see it already with the new contracts that they're offering for this refinery that should be built in Berbice. There they have a limited tax holiday of 10 years. So obviously the government is learning, and I would like to see that this learning phase is not only just sort of linear, but exponential, and that contracts are more in line with contracts that high income economies are setting up. And I think the situation with the Stabroek block is a very good example how to do it. There are, I think if you are smart, you can work out strategies. You can insist on a minimal tax of 15%. I think people at Exxon will sooner or later have to accept this. And oil contracts can change. I mean, the argument that the vice president says there's a sanctity of contract is a ludicrous argument, because in the US, this would mean that the government will not be able to change its tax rates because, contracts were made under a certain tax regime, and it would basically completely impair. In the US, it's the Congress that basically has the right to impose taxes, and it would block them from doing anything like that. And the current PSA exactly has that written in there, that the tax rates cannot be changed, and this is, in my opinion, actually illegal. We'll have to see how how Glenn Lawless, the editor-in-chief and owner of Kaieteur News and Kaieteur Radio, how this court case will end. I think we'll know this early in the next year. And I think from there on, we'll have to work then on really altering the Starbrook production sharing agreement. And personally, I would...
Sorry. I thought you...
Personally, I would also like to see that there's a discussion about the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the NRF, which again requires that both main parties and of course also other stakeholders sit together and see how do we want to really spend all the money right away, or do we want to put savings and be conservative in what we're spending and having the Sovereign Wealth Fund build up, because that will ensure that once Exxon is leaving, that there's still some money left. And we don't want to have a situation like in Nauru. Anybody can Google Nauru and the situation there with their phosphate, and they're again poor as a mouse. They used to be the richest country 30 years ago on the planet, and they spent all their money. So I will close here.
Thank you very much, quickly, Dr. Brandley.
If you don't mind, give me just 20 seconds to, and I wanted to address something that one of the panelists, I can't remember if it's which one, but anyway, about the you talk about Trinidad, and I think it's Darsh. Talk about Trinidad,
Darsh, yes.
And people are saying, well, okay, the probability of something happen, it's very small. It's not about the probability; it's about the consequence. Okay, I would advise Darsh, you put back on those Facebook when they mention those things, ask them if they've got life insurance. Do they expect to die soon when they buy life insurance? Do they have fire insurance for their house? And do they expect that their house is going to burn or catch on fire while they buy? So health insurance, do they expect to get sick when they buy health insurance for 20, 30, 40, or probably their entire life, that they do not even use any of those insurance? So that's the kind of question that I would advise that you pose to them, even Kiana or whoever, because I've heard this again. I've heard this myself. Well, the probability, it's not about the probability, it's the consequences that matter, that you've got to be prepared for. We never buy insurance or have something as a guarantee because we were expecting it to happen. As a matter of fact, we're hoping it doesn't happen. But you've got to be prepared if it happens. And the other thing, and I think we ought to make sure that the government does not get away with this new PSA to get away from the renegotiations for the Starbrook block to apply it. I think that's where they want to take the discussion, and my caution to the media is that you folks are not going to go down that rabbit hole that they want to take you down. Keep the two together, the new PSA with the Starbrook block PSA.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adams. Gentlemen, this has been an enriching and enlightening discussion on the environmental regulation, the guardrails that are needed to protect the oil and gas sector so that the current and future generations can be able to enjoy not just the financial aspect of it, but to also enjoy living in a healthy and a safe environment. So indeed, this was quite edifying, and I thank you for your participation in tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Kiana. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and we are looking forward to be back at your discretion, Kiana.
No, not a problem. And absolutely, you will. And since this is going to be the final show for Guyana's Oil and You before Christmas, I'd like to take the opportunity to wish you, gentlemen, a Merry Christmas. I hope that you enjoyed the season. And to our viewers and listeners, all the best for the season. Please continue to be safe and enjoy yourselves. Be merry, and please continue to join us next week, same time, same place, for more enlightening discussions on Guyana's Oil and You. Gentlemen, thank you once again, and I do hope that you enjoy the season.
Thank you, Kiana.
Thank you, and goodbye from Zurich, Switzerland.
All
The
right.
same of everything back to you and the listeners to your program. And I wish them all the well, for all the best for the season and for the new year.
Thank you, guys. Do have a wonderful evening.
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks.